I still remember the first time they laughed at me, the sound of their voices slicing through the afternoon air like a knife I couldn't dodge. My 2003 Honda, battered and scratched from years of relentless city driving, sat in the driveway as if daring them to mock it, daring them to mock me. And mock me they did. My older brother, Jake, leaned against the side of the house with his arms crossed, the smirk on his face sharp and dismissive, eyes glittering with the satisfaction of superiority. My cousins, always eager to join in, whispered among themselves, nudging one another and pointing whenever I emerged from the car. "Riley, you're broke, aren't you?" Aunt Carol's voice was a dagger, pitched loud enough for everyone to hear, carrying the weight of judgment that always seemed to cling to her words. That single line, delivered with that perfect blend of mockery and assumed authority, struck me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the car. It was about every implication behind it. Every unspoken conclusion they drew about me, my life, my choices. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, an almost physical sensation of indignation, my heartbeat sensing with the rhythm of my humiliation. Each dent, each faded scratch on the hood, became a mirror reflecting their narrow judgment, their unwillingness to see me beyond the shallow assumptions of material worth. The Honda, reliable in its stubbornness, had carried me across countless errands, late-night shifts, and small victories they would never notice. Yet here it was, the focus of derision, a symbol they twisted into proof of my inadequacy. The unfairness of it, the blatant cruelty, ignited something in me, a simmering anger that would not be contained. Every family gathering seemed like an audition for ridicule. At Thanksgiving, the moment I pulled into the driveway, forks paused midair, eyes darting toward the battered frame of my car, whispers ricocheting off the walls like shrapnel. My uncle's laughter, exaggerated and condescending, echoed long after I parked, each note punctuating my sense of invisibility in their hierarchy of wealth and status. Even routine errands became performances of judgment. When they reluctantly allowed me to drive, their constant criticism hovered like smoke, suffocating and persistent. "Careful, that thing might fall apart," Jake would mutter, a grin tugging at his lips, as if my failure were inevitable and amusing. I wanted to retort, to shout, to show them they couldn't define me by a car, by a dent, by a number on a bank statement, but every time I swallowed my response, the rage folding into something colder, sharper, a silent bow forming in the back of my mind. It wasn't just humiliation, it was the accumulation of years of dismissive glances, whispered comments, and relentless comparisons. Each interaction layered itself on top of the last, creating a dense, suffocating fabric of resentment. And yet, alongside the anger, a stubborn determination rooted itself. I realized early that giving them the satisfaction of witnessing my defeat would be worse than enduring the mockery itself. If they believed they could belittle me into submission, I would have to prove them wrong in ways they could never anticipate. Every sneer, every whispered joke became fuel, not just for revenge, but for the reclamation of my dignity, for a quiet power I could wield without their awareness. The Honda, for all its scratches and dents, had carried me through this education and endurance, teaching me to survive the venom of their judgment and to let my resolve grow in its shadow. And in that quiet, smoldering anger, I found a strange clarity. Their laughter was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their own insecurities, their need to assert superiority over someone they could not control. I tried ignoring it at first, telling myself it didn't matter, that their judgment was shallow and inconsequential, but the truth was impossible to escape. I would laugh, awkwardly, at their jokes, insist I was fine with my car, brush off the whispered ridicule as if it slid off my skin. Yet beneath the practiced smiles and polite nods, there was a knot of tension, a tight, gnawing weight lodged deep in my chest. Every glance at my Honda, every joke thrown in passing, resonated far louder in my mind than in the room. The laughter, the smirks, the way Aunt Carol would fix me with that knowing look, like she was seeing through me to some imagined deficiency, clung to my thoughts long after I left the conversation. I could rationalize it, tell myself I was secure in my own life, my own achievements, but the subtle sting persisted. The humiliation was quiet, insidious, like a shadow following me wherever I went. The summer reunion loomed ahead like a storm I could feel approaching, days away yet heavy in my mind. My stomach twisted at the thought of sitting there, enduring the same cruel jokes, the same glances of assumed superiority. I could already hear the echo of their voices in my head. Still driving that thing, Riley? You really can't afford anything better, can you? Each imagined phrase tightened the coil of anxiety in my chest. I pictured my Honda in the driveway, scarred, ordinary, powerless against their expectations, powerless against their ability to turn a car into a weapon of shame. The thought of walking past it, past their judgmental eyes, filled me with a restless, suffocating tension, an ache that settled in my bones. Even when I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that their opinions were irrelevant, the doubt crept in. Did I really need to prove anything to them? Was it worth the energy, the effort, to care about what they thought? These questions gnawed at me late at night, spinning in endless circles, each one echoing the cruel narratives I'd internalized over the years. The humiliation was compounded by the familiarity of it all, the way family gatherings were always punctuated by subtle reminders of my supposed mediocrity, the way their laughter framed the space as if I didn't belong, as if I were a guest in my own life. And yet, within that pain, something else flickered, fragile but unmistakable. I remembered every time they had called me average, every sly remark about being broke or incapable. I remembered the unspoken hierarchy, their constant need to assert dominance, to see me diminished for their own amusement. That memory hardened into a quiet, unyielding resolve. I owed it to myself to reclaim the dignity they had tried to strip away, to stand somewhere beyond the reach of their mockery. The weight of their expectations became fuel rather than restraint. The ache of humiliation transformed into purpose, not vengeance for its own sake, but the reclamation of self-respect, the deliberate assertion that I could not be defined by their narrow vision. In the middle of that simmering pain, I realized that enduring, surviving, and ultimately prevailing required more than passive endurance. It required action, strategy, and the courage to assert my worth in a way that would be undeniable, in a way that could not be ignored or belittled. My anger from before had settled into a controlled, patient determination, one that burned quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to surface. The lesson was clear. I would no longer allow their expectations or judgments to define the boundaries of my life. I owed it to myself, first and foremost, to stand tall, to assert my value, to turn their scorn into the measure of my resolve. Then I had an idea. It came not as a sudden lightning strike, but as a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in my thinking, a spark buried beneath months of frustration, humiliation, and simmering anger. The thought took root, small at first, fragile, but it grew with each repetition, gaining weight and clarity until it occupied every corner of my mind. I had recently started a new job at a tech company, a position that demanded rigor, intelligence, and creativity, and one that finally placed me in a position of genuine influence. My promotion had been hard-earned, the result of late nights, careful calculations, and relentless persistence, and it came with a perk I had not anticipated but now realized could be wielded with precision. Access to a company vehicle, sleek, immaculate, and powerful, the very car my family had obsessively admired from glossy magazine pages, drooled over during casual conversations, and never dared purchase for themselves. The irony of it hit me with sharp satisfaction. This car, their ideal of success, was now, for one weekend, my instrument of quiet triumph. I pictured it in my mind's eye, the smooth, reflective finish, the subtle curves catching sunlight in a way that commanded attention without demanding it, the interior pristine, leather seats gleaming, the engine humming with the promise of authority. I imagined it parked in front of their house, the sound of it drawing eyes before I even stepped out, the subtle, impossible glamour of its presence contrasting so starkly with my old, battered Honda that the shock would almost physically knock the breath from them. Their assumptions about me, their preconceived notions of limitation, would unravel in the span of a few seconds, leaving only awe and disbelief in their wake. The thought made my pulse quicken, a thrill of anticipation rising from the pit of my stomach, mingling with the satisfaction that comes from turning past humiliation into leverage. from transforming every sneer into fuel for strategy. I made my plans quietly, methodically, ensuring that every detail served the goal of surprise. No hints, no passing comments, no casual mentions. This was not to be anticipated, dissected, or undermined. I mapped the route from my apartment to their house, considered the timing, the way the sunlight would hit the car's surface, the angles from which each of them would first see it. I rehearsed my own demeanor, the controlled confidence I would exude as I stepped out, letting them absorb the reality without interference, allowing the silence and the sudden awe to speak louder than any words I could muster. Every imagined expression, the widening of eyes, the hesitation in forced smiles, the subtle tension in their bodies, served as a silent victory already, a prelude to the moment when theory would become reality. Even as I planned, a deeper layer of satisfaction settled over me. This was more than mere revenge or vanity. It was a reclamation of space, a reassertion of my own worth in the face of repeated diminishment. The months of subtle cruelty, the whispered judgments and public mockery, had not been able to define me. Now, for the first time, I would assert my presence in a way undeniable, unavoidable, and perfectly orchestrated. I felt hope rising, not the fragile kind that wavers in uncertainty, but a grounded, resolute hope born of capability, foresight, and quiet rebellion. The thought that they had never imagined this possibility, that they would witness the realization of their underestimation, filled me with a sense of power that was both exhilarating and deeply satisfying. I was no longer the passive subject of ridicule. I was the architect of a moment that would flip their assumptions entirely, and for that weekend, I could finally hold the reins. The reunion day arrived, and with it a pulse of exhilaration I had not expected to feel so intensely. I could sense the weight of anticipation pressing in around me, not just my own, but the collective energy of a family that had spent years defining me by limitations I had long since outgrown. As I approached the driveway, the sunlight hit the sleek, polished surface of the company vehicle at the perfect angle, the metallic finish catching every glint, reflecting brilliance that demanded notice. The car seemed to exude authority, a quiet dominance that contrasted sharply with my old Honda's humble presence. It was as if the vehicle itself was aware of its purpose, ready to serve as the instrument of revelation, of validation, of subtle, precise justice. My fingers traced the door handle for reassurance, grounding me in the reality of what I had orchestrated, before sliding it open with deliberate calm. I stepped out in a stride measured and unshakable, the soft hum of the engine fading behind me, leaving silence that felt almost tangible. My posture, straight and unapologetic, radiated confidence, a stark contrast to the years of shrinking under their judgment. I let my gaze sweep across the front yard, taking in the familiar faces, frozen mid-gesture, mid-laughter, mid-whisper, as if the world had paused for the exact moment of impact. Aunt Carol, mid-sentence with a comment she had clearly intended as cutting, froze, her mouth opening slightly as if the words she had carefully rehearsed had been swallowed by the sudden reality in front of her. My cousin's chatter dissolved into rapid, nervous whispers, glances darting between one another as their eyes betrayed the shock that threatened to ripple outward in disbelief. Even Jake, my older brother, whose smirk had once been permanent armor, now vanished entirely, leaving him looking as though he had been punched in the gut by something intangible yet undeniable. I felt a quiet, almost meditative satisfaction settle over me. Every insult, every whispered judgment, every pointed laugh over the years now replayed like a montage, but this time they were powerless, transformed into fuel for a moment of perfect equilibrium. The car itself became a vessel of that satisfaction, a silent testament to the reality they had refused to acknowledge, that I was capable, resourceful, and deserving of success on my own terms. The moment stretched, deliciously, as I let the tableau unfold, observing subtle micro-reactions, the flicker of recognition, the stammer of attempted composure, the slight rise in tension in every shoulder, every hand. Then, with deliberate calm, I opened the passenger side door and called out in a voice that held both challenge and invitation, "Who wants a ride?" The words cut through the lingering murmurs like a bell, and I watched, internally grinning, as their certainty of superiority wavered, then shattered entirely. They hesitated, unsure whether to trust their senses, uncertain if the reality before them was legitimate. Every eye in the family now tracked my movements, every whispered insult from the past bouncing back upon them, reflected in the quiet dominance of the scene. I reveled in that charged silence, the way it pressed against them while simultaneously releasing me, the perfect balance of triumph and vindication. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable, not arrogant, not boastful, just undeniably present. This was more than revenge. It was a reclamation, a statement that the person they had diminished and underestimated was fully capable of redefining the terms of interaction. Each heartbeat carried the rhythm of authority, each breath a subtle assertion. I was here, I was counted, and their assumptions could no longer dictate the narrative. In that moment, the quiet, perfect revenge I had long imagined was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, undeniable, and entirely mine. As I eased the sleek vehicle onto the street, the engine's low hum a gentle counterpoint to the flutter of nerves and anticipation. I felt a subtle shift within me. A loosening, a quiet unburdening of years I hadn't fully acknowledged had weighed me down. My family's chatter filled the cabin, hesitant and uneven, a mix of stammered compliments and awkward attempts at apologies. They complimented the car in a tone that wavered between admiration and disbelief, each remark a reminder of the gulf between their expectations and the reality of my independence. I listened, detached but aware, noting the stilted cadence of their voices, the way their eyes darted toward me, seeking some acknowledgement, some permission to relax. And in that awareness, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not vindictive, not triumphant in the cruel sense, but the deep, satisfying recognition that I had demonstrated something far more enduring than fleeting superiority, authenticity. I wasn't cruel. I hadn't designed this moment to mock them, to humiliate or punish. Every detail, the polished finish of the car, the effortless confidence in my stride, the timing of my arrival, had been a silent assertion of truth, a demonstration that the person they had labeled average or broke was never defined by their assumptions. I realized in a vivid, almost startling way that the version of me they ridiculed never truly existed. That girl, the one tethered to their judgments, shrinking under the weight of whispered insults, had long since been replaced by someone capable of commanding her own narrative. The ride became a living testament to that, a moving tableau of reclamation and quiet empowerment. I glanced at Jake, who had finally caught his breath, his eyes now reflecting a mixture of astonishment and reluctant respect. Aunt Carol, who had delivered her cutting remarks with the confidence of someone certain in her authority, now seemed smaller somehow, not diminished in stature but in certainty. Their reactions, stammering apologies, and awkward attempts to bridge the emotional gap reminded me that approval had never been the currency of my self-worth. What mattered was recognition of my own journey, my own choices, the quiet accumulation of effort and persistence that had brought me here. As the car navigated familiar streets, the sunlight glinting off the metallic curves, I felt a sense of liberation expand within me. The Honda, battered though it had been, had served as my introduction to resilience, but this vehicle, this opportunity represented something greater, a symbol of agency and capability, the physical manifestation of a self-determined trajectory that was untethered from the judgments of others. I could see my family leaning back into the seats, finally subdued, and it occurred to me that this moment was not about them at all. It was about me stepping fully into my own space, asserting my dignity without aggression, without cruelty, without needing permission or validation. I realized then, in a clarity that bordered on exhilaration, that I didn't need their approval. My independence, my success, my quiet victories, these were mine alone. No glance, no whisper, no judgment could alter the truth of my life, my choices, my worth. The freedom that had been accumulating in the marrow of my bones for years now spilled outward with a tangible force, a sense of liberation that had nothing to do with the vehicle, everything to do with the ownership of self. For the first time in years, I drove not simply in a car they had admired, but into a space where I could finally feel unshackled, fully alive, and utterly, beautifully free.